What makes a concert truly unforgettable? Now, it's not always about that perfect intonation or the cleanest technique. Sometimes it's about the laughter between friends on stage and the story that pulls the audience in. Maybe it's the pacing or variety that makes that night feel alive. Hi, I'm Jeff Price, and I'm the host of Intentional Musicianship, where we talk about everything performance practice, storytelling, and showmanship. We're trying to turn concerts into experiences people never forget. So this week, I wanted to reflect on a concert I went to, just a simple faculty recital at my alma mater, West Virginia University. And this one happened to be Jeff Siegfried and Friends. Jeff's the saxophone professor there, so I go to as many concerts of his that I can. I've seen him up in Pittsburgh. I've seen him on the internet. He's just an amazing, technically flawless, incredibly polished musician. In fact, when I walk by his studio and I hear him around 10 o'clock at night after a concert, he's practicing the things that truly set people apart in the nuance of playing the instrument. He is just amazing. But I'll tell you what, this concert was different. And I think it was the "and friends" part that changed everything. You see, in this concert, we had 5 faculty members that joined him on stage. And the atmosphere was immediately more relaxed. Of course, the audience knew who was playing, but it was different than just soloist and friends. This really was a soloist and friends. They laughed, they shared quick stories, they played off one another in the best possible way. At one point, during a vocal piece, because Jeff not only sang, played saxophone, composed pieces, he's had a little bit of everything in there, but in the vocal piece about 2 men feuding over a girlfriend, the one singer turned and said, "Don't do that again." And the whole room erupted. It was just the timing of the moment. Later, after a bassoon and saxophone duet, the 2 bumped fists. It wasn't planned. It was just genuine camaraderie. And what struck me was that the technical skill was there. Hey, how could it not be the way he practices and he perfects his art? But the connection that was made the concert unforgettable. So in this show, in this concert, I was reminded of something. The best performances feel like a great night at home with friends. Might be the living room, might be part of the kitchen. You know, that living room is where you make people feel comfortable, where they know they're welcome. Maybe it's the kitchen where you have these great conversations, and sometimes just spontaneous, a little unpredictable and full of warmth. And on stage, that means we're taking all this professionalism and practice and we're infusing our personality. Now, you don't have to be silly or react like Abbott and Costello or an old comedian tag team, but you can be real. It's the difference between I'm performing for you and we're sharing this together. So some takeaways from this concert is to ask yourself, how do you bring that living room and kitchen energy to your next concert? And here are a few ideas that I saw that night and some I've learned over time. You got to set the tone early. So even before the first note, the atmosphere matters. You know, that quick welcome, a smile, or even just a confident pause tells the audience that they belong here. And even in that few seconds of eye contact, I tell you what, that's worth more than a dozen flawless passages. And tonight, I felt like I was welcome at the concert. Another takeaway is to create conversational pacing. Now, the concert had great variety: fast, slow, serious, playful, solos, ensembles. It flowed like a good conversation, moments of laughter followed by reflection. So think about pacing the energy of your program, not just the order of your pieces. Too much intensity back to back can tire the listener, and that contrast can keep them engaged. Think about what you would do if you had people over at the house. So a third thing is just to use introductions and dialogue intentionally. The performers didn't talk for long, but when they did, it mattered. They shared personal stories between pieces that helped the audience invest emotionally. It turns a performance into a shared moment. Hey, but if the humor fits your personality, use it. There were a lot of laughs that evening, and it can really reset the energy in the room. Fourth, invite your colleagues, your friends, and your audiences into the experience. So watching these 5 faculty members cheer for each other, that made the audience feel like insiders. And whether it's chamber partners on stage or the people sitting in the front row, make them a part of this story. Applaud for each other, react, acknowledge what's happening. If people react to one another in a positive way, it just sort of grows. That inclusion from a couple people just keeps growing and it deepens the engagement. And finally, end with generosity. You might have the encore, the farewell, the final bow. Those last few minutes linger. So think about your closing moment, not as the end of the performance, but as a moment you send people home with a feeling. Ask yourself, as you're planning this show, what do I want the audience to carry out of the hall tonight? So when I walked out of that recital, I realized something simple. Great performances aren't just played, they're hosted. They mix artistry with authenticity, structure with spontaneity, and the best ones, they feel like the kind of night where you'd linger in the kitchen talking long after the meal is over. Because in the end, people won't remember how you played, but they'll remember how you made them feel. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Intentional Musicianship. I'd love to hear your stories, what concerts have stayed with you, and why. Was it the music, the humor, the feeling in the room? Was it the wink between the players, the wink to the audience? There are a lot of things that can help us connect with one another from the stage to the audience. You can always connect with us at intentionalmusicianship.com. I'd love to hear from each and every one of you. I hope you'll join us on the next episode of Intentional Musicianship, and that'll be in around 2 more weeks. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.